Take a close look at this. Jonathan Haidt, the noted New York University psychologist, calls it the most important graph in the world. Why does he say that? Because he knows this graph reveals a simple, inescapable fact. There is no substitute for free market capitalism as a promoter of human prosperity. Let it be noted that Haidt is no one's idea of a conservative. But when hard evidence stares him in the face, he's not going to look away. The graph is based on the research conducted by the late British economist Angus Maddison. The numbers along the x-axis are years, 2,000 of them. The number on the y-axis are dollars, all of them, divided by the number of people on the planet. It's what's called GDP per capita, which is the world's economic output divided by its population. GDP is considered the best measurement of a country's standard of living, and in this case, the world's standard of living. Often when I show this graph to students, I get this comment: that's not capitalism, it's just the impact of the Industrial Revolution. So I show them another chart by the Madison Project. This one breaks the GDP hockey stick into regions. As you can see, there are a number of hockey sticks, but note that they don't rise at the same time. The United States surged first. Why? Well, in a very fortuitous coincidence, the year 1776 witnessed both the signing of our Declaration of Independence and the publication of a book called The Wealth of Nations by the Scottish economist and philosopher Adam Smith. In his book, Smith explained how to create a modern free market capitalist economy and the benefits of doing so. America's wise founders took Smith's principles to heart, and within a mere 100 years, the blink of an eye historically, capitalism turned the United States from 13 backwoods colonies into the world's largest economy, and it's held that position ever since. Western Europe shot up as well, but later. It rose steadily during the Industrial Revolution and then experienced a sharp rise after World War II when, between the end of the war and the mid-1960s, it fully embraced the free market. Japan too shot up after World War II, surpassing Western Europe for the first time, after the U.S. helped the Japanese transition to a democracy and a free market capitalist economy. Eastern Europe took off after it was released from the Soviet Union and socialism in 1991. China did likewise after the Chinese moved away from strict socialism and implemented some limited free market policies. One can only imagine where China would be now if its leaders had fully unleashed the forces of the free market. Yes, during this period of economic expansion, the wealthy got wealthier. That always happens when new wealth is created. But the middle class and the poor also greatly benefited. Here's another telling chart. This one is from the World Bank. In 1820, 94% of people lived in extreme poverty. Thanks to capitalism, by 2015, that number declined to 9.6%. Single digits for the first time in human history. Now, it's still too many, but if we're going to reduce the number even more, we need to understand what caused the decline. Free market capitalism. If we combine the Angus Maddison hockey stick chart and the World Bank data on extreme poverty, what we get is something quite amazing. Unprecedented global prosperity and an unprecedented decline in poverty across the globe over the past 200 years. That's capitalism in a nutshell. One more chart. Johan Norberg, a Swedish economic historian, shows us how well ordinary people do when they work in a free market economy. Since 1990, hunger, poverty, illiteracy, and child mortality have all declined significantly with the decline of socialism. This all happened while we added 2 billion more people to the world. Far more people, far less poverty, better health outcomes, fewer babies dying. That's what economic freedom, capitalism can do. President John Kennedy, a Democrat, said it best. While making his case for significant tax cuts in 1963, he said a rising tide lifts all boats. Kennedy didn't believe that the poor only get richer when the rich get poorer. He believed everyone could get richer with economic growth. History has shown that he was right. This whole capitalism versus socialism debate is backwards. It's not those who advocate for free market capitalism who need to justify their actions. Rather, it's those advocating for socialism or any form of it who have a lot of explaining to do.
Let's discuss an important concept from economics, the Laffer curve. This concept is named after the man who developed it, Arthur Laffer, a major American economist who has taught at the University of Chicago, University of Southern California, and elsewhere. The Laffer curve illustrates the two most important things we need to know about taxes: how much money the government can raise from taxes, and at what level of taxation the government might start getting less, not more revenue. The Laffer curve is illustrated here by a two-dimensional graph. The horizontal line is the tax rate that the government chooses, and the vertical line is the revenue that the government receives from that tax rate. First, because 0 times any number is 0, if the tax rate is 0, then the government receives 0 revenue. Accordingly, 0, 0 is our first point on the curve. Now suppose the government chooses a very small tax rate, say 1%. The government will then begin to receive some revenue from citizens. This means that another point in the curve must be something like this. Now suppose the government charges a 2% tax rate. Then everyone would agree that it will receive even more revenue, which means that another point in the curve must be something like this. And if the government keeps raising the rate, then revenue will continue to go up, at least when we're in the low tax rate part of the graph. This means that if we fill in the curve, it has an upward slope, at least when we're in the low tax rate part of the graph. Now suppose the government charges a 100% tax rate. If this happens, then no one would work. That is, why would anyone work when the government is going to take all the money that they make? And if no one works, then national income would be 0. This means that government revenue would be 100% of 0, or 0. This means that another point of the curve must be here. Now, let's complete the curve. When we do, we see that the curve must have a hump. That is, it could look like this, or this, or this. But it has to have a hump. This is simply because the revenue line has to go up in the low tax rate part of the graph, and it has to start going down to reach the point we drew at the 100% tax rate. But if the curve slopes downward, it implies something remarkable, something that few of those who push for higher and higher taxes want to admit. It means that when tax rates are high, if you make them higher, you'll actually bring in less revenue to the government. This has in fact occurred in practice. For instance, during the Great Depression, when Congress passed the Hawley-Smoot tariff bill, although the bill raised taxes on imported goods, the revenue that came from those taxes actually decreased. A more recent example occurred in the early 1980s. After President Reagan and Congress drastically reduced the tax rates on the rich, the tax revenue that came from the rich actually increased. All economists, even the most left-wing ones, agree that the true Laffer curve, the one that reflects real life, has a hump. And that therefore, the curve has a downward sloping part, meaning at some point, tax revenues start going down when you increase rates. So where then do economists disagree? They disagree about exactly where the hump occurs. When I took my first economics class in 1984 at Stanford University, the textbook said that the hump occurs somewhere around the 70% tax rate. But apparently, I was taught something wrong. New evidence from an unexpected source suggests that the hump occurs at a much lower tax rate, something around 33%. That source is a study by Christina Romer and her husband David Romer. Both are economics professors at the University of California, Berkeley. Christina Romer was the chairman of President Barack Obama's Council of Economic Advisors. In other words, the study was written by one of the most influential liberal economists in the United States, and it was published in the American Economic Review, the most widely respected economics journal in the world. The study examined how national income responds to tax rates. But as far as what concerns us here, the key point is that if you do the math, the results imply that the hump on the Laffer curve occurs where the tax rate is around 33%, much lower than economists previously thought. Let's now put these findings into political terms. They suggest that no matter what your politics, you should not want tax rates to be above 33%. Obviously, conservatives and many moderates think rates should be lower than that. But even if you are an extreme left-winger and your only goal is to make government as big as possible, you should still oppose a tax rate higher than 33%. The reason is that, as the Romer and Romer study suggests, when tax rates go higher than that, the government actually gets less money. Everyone of every political persuasion should pay attention to the Romer and Romer study and its important implications. They suggest that if we decrease tax rates, government revenues might actually rise. I'm Tim Grosclose, professor of political science and economics at UCLA for Prager University.
The rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. The top 1% of people on the planet have half the wealth. Western corporations are plundering developing countries. Capitalism is on its last legs. Really? The truth is that global inequality is tumbling. Yeah, the rich are getting richer, but the poor are getting richer faster. And what's driving that process? The market. Look at the most basic measures: literacy, longevity, infant mortality, calorie intake, height. More and more people are being lifted out of poverty. I think of the changes just in my lifetime. When I was born in 1971, an American worker had to earn a month's salary to be able to afford a TV set. Now it's 2 days. In 1971, fewer than half of girls worldwide completed at least primary education. Now it's more than 90%. In 1971, a stationary car emitted more pollution than a car moving at full speed today. Go a little further back. In the 17th century, the most powerful man in the world was Louis XIV of France. Every night he'd have 40 dishes prepared for his dinner, and he'd pick the one that he felt like. But think about it. A receptionist today can stop off at a store on her way home and have not only a wider choice than that king, but a fresher one and a healthier one. We all live better than Louis XIV. And what's caused that miracle? Not any UN development program, not any government aid scheme. What caused it was the market. The most rapid falls in poverty are happening in countries that are joining the global trading system. Compare growth rates in free trading Colombia and protectionist Venezuela, or in free trading Vietnam and protectionist Laos, or in free trading Bangladesh and protectionist Pakistan. It's the same story every time. China after 1979, India after 1991. You remove barriers to trade, prices fall, your people no longer have to work every hour just to afford food and basic commodities. They have time to invent and make and buy and sell other things. The whole economy is stimulated. Poverty falls. Okay, you might say. So maybe capitalism works, maybe people are better off. But isn't there a cost? Doesn't it make us more materialistic? Doesn't it make us greedier? Well, if by greed you mean a desire for material wealth, that's part of the human condition. It's in our DNA. Or if you prefer, it's in our fallen nature. Under any system, socialism, communism, fascism, absolute monarchy, theocracy, people want more stuff. The unique quality of capitalism is that it structures the incentives so that the way to succeed, the way to be greedy, if you insist on using that vocabulary, is to offer a service to the people around you. Under every other system, you get on by sucking up to those in power, commissars or kings or dictators. But under a free market system, you get on by offering consumers something they want. As the economist Joseph Schumpeter put it, the achievement of capitalism is not to provide more silk stockings for princesses, but to bring them within the reach of the shop girl. So, why can't we see it? Why do well-intentioned, idealistic young people oppose free trade and market liberalization, thinking that they're standing up for the poorest people on the planet, when in fact they're doing the opposite? A big part of the answer is aesthetic. As the Victorian novelist Anthony Trollope wrote, "Poverty, to be scenic, should be rural." I grew up in Lima, Peru, which in those days was surrounded by shanty towns known as Las Barriadas. Western visitors would come and they'd visit Machu Picchu, and then they'd ask in bewilderment why people migrated from the Andes to the slums? Why did they swap the clean air and the mountain scenery for open sewers and traffic fumes? It's a very first world question. No Peruvian ever needed to ask why you'd leave a place with no electricity, no school, no clinic, and no jobs. Those shantytowns, those barriadas, for most of their residents are transitional. They're busy places, humming with enterprise, and the people in them sense that they're on their way up. If we want to help those people, the best thing we can do is let them sell us their stuff. Capitalism has achieved things which earlier ages ascribed to gods and magicians. It's abolishing hunger and disease and want. It's led to an unprecedented enrichment that is the central fact of your life. The fact that you're watching this video is enough to tell me that. Now, let it work its magic in the rest of the world.
Many people believe that free market capitalism is selfish, even immoral. They say it's about greed, about hunger for money and power, that it helps the rich and hurts the poor. They're wrong. The free market is not only economically superior, it is morally superior to any other way of organizing economic behavior. Here's why. The free market calls for voluntary actions between individuals. There's no coercion. In a free market, if I want something from you, I have to do something for you. Let's say I mow your lawn and you pay me $20. What does that $20 really mean? When I go to the grocer and say, I would like to have 4 pounds of steak, he in effect says to me, you want a lot of people to serve you. Ranchers, truckers, butchers, and packagers. All these people have to be paid. What did you do to serve your fellow man? Well, I say, I mowed my fellow man's lawn. And the grocer says, prove it. Then I offer him the $20. Think of the money that you've earned as a certificate of performance. It's proof that you've served your fellow man. People accuse the free market of not being moral because they say it's a zero-sum game, like poker, where if you win, it means that I have to lose. But the free market is not a zero-sum game, it is a positive-sum game. You do something good for me, such as give me that steak, and I'll do something good for you, give you $20. I'm better off because I value the steak more than I value the $20, and the grocer is better off because he valued the $20 more than he valued the steak. We both win. Ironically, it's the government, not the free market, that creates zero-sum games in our economy. If you use the government to get a food stamp, a farm subsidy, or a business bailout, you will benefit, but at the expense of your fellow citizens. Isn't it more moral to require that people serve their fellow man in order to have a claim on what he produces, rather than not serve others and still have a claim? But a lot of people ask, what about giant corporations? Don't they have too much power over our lives? Not in a free market, because in a free market, we, the people, decide the fate of companies who want our business. Free market capitalism will punish a corporation that does not satisfy customers or fails to use resources efficiently. Businesses, big and small, that wish to prosper are held accountable by the people who vote with their dollars. And again, it's the government that can undo this. Take the example of the American automobile industry. It was struggling to survive in 2009. Why? Because they were producing cars that did not please a sufficient number of their fellow men. In a free market, they would therefore have gone bankrupt. The market would have said, look, you're done. Sell your plant and equipment to somebody who can do a better job. But when Chrysler and General Motors failed, they went to Washington, D.C., and got the government to bail them out. The government bailout essentially meant to them, you don't have to be accountable to customers and stockholders. No matter how inferior your product is, And no matter how inefficient you are, we'll keep you in business by taking your fellow man's money. When the government interferes in this way, it takes the power away from the people and rewards companies that couldn't compete successfully in the marketplace. That may work out very well for politicians, big unions, and corporate officers, but it seldom does for the taxpayer. That's why a free market system can only work if there is limited government. Limited government means you and I decide which businesses survive. That's the America that our founding fathers envisioned. A limited government that has only a few specifically mentioned or enumerated powers that are listed in Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution. It's this brilliant limited government notion that produced the wealthiest nation in history. In a free market, the ambition and the voluntary effort of citizens, not the government, drives the economy. That is, people, to the best of their ability, shaping their own destiny. Sounds pretty moral to me. I'm Walter Williams of George Mason University for Prager University.
Capitalism versus socialism. We can sum up each economic system in one line. Capitalism is based on human greed. Socialism is based on human need, right? No, wrong, so wrong. It's exactly backwards. And I'll prove it to you. Been on Amazon lately? Each of the thousands of products Amazon offers represents the work of people who believe they have something you want or need. If they're right, they prosper. If they're wrong, they don't. That's how the free market works. It encourages people to improve their lives by satisfying the needs of others. No one starts a business making a thing or providing a service for themselves. They start a business to make things or provide services for others. Now, I speak from personal experience. When I was the CEO of the company that owns Carl's Jr. and Hardee's restaurant chains, we spent millions of dollars every year trying to determine what customers wanted. If our customers didn't like something, we changed it, and fast. Because if we didn't, our competitors would, pun intended, eat us for lunch. The consumer, that's you, has the ultimate power. In effect, you vote with every dollar you spend. In a socialist economy, the government has the ultimate power. It decides what you get from a limited supply it decides should exist. Instead of millions of people making millions of decisions about what they want, a few people, government elites, decide what people should have and how much they should pay for it. Not surprisingly, they always get it wrong. Have you ever noticed that late-stage socialist failures always run out of essential items like toilet paper? Of course, this isn't a problem for those who have the right connections with the right people. Those chosen few get whatever they want. But everyone else is out of luck. Venezuela, once the richest country in South America, is the most recent example of socialism driving a prosperous country into an economic ditch. Now, maybe you think it's an unfair example. I'm not sure why, but okay. We'll ignore the fact that leftist activists celebrated it as a great socialist success right up until it wasn't. But what about Western European countries? Don't they have socialist economies? People seem pretty happy there. Why can't we have what they have? Free healthcare, free college, stronger unions. Good question, and the answer may surprise you. There are no socialist countries in Western Europe. Most are just as capitalist as the United States. The only difference, and it's a big one, is that they offer more government benefits than the U.S. does. We can argue about the cost of these benefits and the point at which they reduce individual initiative, thus doing more harm than good. Scandinavians have been debating those questions for years. But only a free market capitalist economy can produce the wealth necessary to sustain all of the supposedly free stuff Europeans enjoy. To get the free stuff, after all, you have to create enough wealth to generate enough tax revenue to pay for everything the government gives away. Without capitalism, you're Venezuela. In a 2015 speech at Harvard, Denmark's prime minister took great pains to make this point. I know that some people in the U.S. associate the Nordic model with socialism. Therefore, I would like to make one thing clear. Denmark is far from a socialist planned economy. Denmark is a market economy. So when you point to Denmark as a paragon of socialism, you're really singing the praises of capitalism. The more capitalism, the less socialism you need. Look at America since 2017. A policy of lower taxes and less government regulation, that's more capitalism, has led to a robust economic expansion, something thought impossible just a few years earlier. Unemployment, notably among minority groups typically most at risk for poverty, is at a generational low. Economic expansion gets people off welfare and into work. That's less socialism. None of this requires a degree in economics. Common sense is all you need. That's why it's so frustrating to see young people praising socialism and criticizing capitalism. It's bad enough that they're working against their own interests, better job prospects, better wages, personal freedom. But they're also working against the interest of the less fortunate. Capitalism leads to economic democracy. Socialism leads to the economic dictatorship of the elite. Always and everywhere. So beware what you ask for. You just might get it.
We hear a lot about large companies in the news, but small business is the engine of the U.S. economy. America is home to more than 28 million small businesses that employ 57 million workers. And when you add owners and employees together, that's a community of roughly 85 million hardworking Americans dependent on the success of small business, most of the private sector workforce. Small business owners are America's most important job creators. U.S. small businesses accounted for almost 2/3 of the net new jobs created between 1993 and 2013, a grand total of 11.8 million new career opportunities. In 2012, small businesses created more than 2.1 million net new jobs. Small businesses are the country's main job creators because they're often growing and looking for new markets to expand. To do so, they need additional employees along the way. Large businesses, on the other hand, generally stay the same size, hiring new employees to replace departing ones. Unfortunately, high taxes and recent government regulations in healthcare, finance, and labor disproportionately hurt small businesses and prevent them from growing and adding new jobs to the economy. Big business with big profits can afford to comply with red tape in a way that small businesses just starting out cannot. As a result, small businesses still haven't recovered completely from the Great Recession, and it shows by the chronically weak labor market. More than 94 million Americans are not working or actively looking for jobs. The labor force participation rate, which measures the percentage of employees and job seekers in the U.S., is less than 63%, the lowest figure since the late 1970s. To bring small businesses back and strengthen the job market, job-killing taxes and regulations must be rolled back. Job creators should be encouraged to hire more employees, not forced to reduce career opportunities. With 85 million people depending on the success of small business, it's easy to see why small business is too big to fail.
Once upon a time, there were 3 brothers, triplets, named Tom, Dick, and Harry Class. They were raised in the same home with the same parents, had the same IQ, same skills, and same opportunities. Each was married and had 2 children. They were all carpenters making $25 per hour. While they were very similar in all these respects, they had different priorities. For example, Tom chose to work 20 hours per week, while his brother Dick worked 40 hours, and Harry 60. It should also be noted that Harry's wife worked full-time as an office manager for a salary of $50,000. Dick's wife sold real estate part-time 10 hours a week and made $25,000 per year. Tom's wife did not work. Tom and Dick spent all of their family income. Since they paid into Social Security, they figured they didn't need to save for retirement. Harry and his wife, on the other hand, had, over many years, put away money each month and invested it in stocks and bonds. Here's how it worked out. Tom made $25,000 a year. Dick and his wife made $75,000, and Harry and his wife $150,000. When a new housing development opened up in their community, the brothers decided to buy equally priced homes on the same private street. One day, the brothers decided to pool their funds for the purpose of improving their street. Concerned about crime and safety, and wanting a more attractive setting for their homes, the three families decided to install a security gate at the street's entrance, repave the street's surface, and enhance the lighting and landscaping. The work was done for a total cost of $30,000. Harry assumed they would divide the bill 3 ways, each brother paying $10,000. But Tom and Dick objected. "Why should we pay the same as you?" they said. "You make much more money than we do." Harry was puzzled. "What does that have to do with anything?" he asked. "My family makes more money because my wife and I work long hours and because we have saved some of the money we've earned to make additional money from investments. Why should we be penalized for that?" "Harry, you can work and save all you like," Tom countered. "But my wife and I want to enjoy ourselves now, not 25 years from now." "Fine, Tom, do what you want. It's a free country. But why should I have to pay for that?" "I can't believe you're being so unbrotherly," Tom argued. "You have a lot of money and I don't. I thought you'd be more generous." At this point, Dick, the peacemaker in the family, entered the conversation. "I've got an idea," Dick said. "Our combined income is $250,000, and $30,000 is 12% of that amount. Why don't we each pay that percentage of our income? Under that formula, Tom would pay $3,000, I would pay $9,000, and Harry would pay $18,000. "I have a much better idea," said Tom, "and one that's fairer than what you're proposing." Dick and Harry turned to Tom. "Harry should pay $23,450. Dick, you should pay $6,550. And I will pay nothing." To Dick, this sounded completely arbitrary and not really fair, but it did have one big plus. His share would be $2,450 less under Tom's formula than under his own. So he decided to be silent. Harry, however, was stunned. "You want me to pay almost 80% of the bill despite the fact that each of us is receiving the exact same benefits? Where did you get such a crazy idea?" "From no less an authority than the U.S. government," Tom responded as he pulled out a gray booklet. "It's all right here in the IRS tax tables. This is the progressive income tax system all U.S. taxpayers live under, and I don't see why we should be any different. In fact, I believe all future improvements should be paid in this way." "Works for me," said Dick. So, by a vote of 2-1, the cost of the street improvements was divided as Tom had proposed, even though they benefited equally, and even though the reason Harry had more money was that he and his wife had worked many more hours than his brothers and their wives, and had saved some of what they had earned, instead of spending it all. Tom and Dick lived happily ever after with their new arrangement. Harry grumbled a lot, but whenever he complained, his brothers called him greedy and selfish. The end.